I'm Scott, and thanks for joining us again today for another episode of the RockLove Magazine Podcast, the podcast that celebrates the magazine, the zine, that ran from 1995 to 2001 in honor of the name of a Todd Rundgren and Utopia song. Long story into the history of that, which we did back in episode 1, so go check it out. And today I brought back a guest who was on one of those earlier episodes where we talked about how much we love Todd Rundgren, and that is Tom Jennings up in the Buffalo, New York area. Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Go Bills. Well, they went home, but
yeah,
go
that's a
Bills.
toughie. So Tom is a music aficionado and journalist and teacher and a lot of other things. What else am I leaving out?
No, man. Podcast host, YouTube channel, writer, the whole 9 yards. I've got my channel is Tuning In with Tom Jennings, is THOM. And I have a Substack as well, which is Tuning In with Tom, which also where I run my weekly column for the Niagara Gazette and the Lockport Union Sun Journal. So I keep busy.
Nice,
as my wife likes to say.
Awesome, good. It's good for your wife that you keep busy. So today, what we want to do, we're going to do one of our list episodes like we've been doing lately. And I said to Tom, let's come up with 6 albums that are bands and albums that we love that have clear and obvious Beatles influences in them. Because of our mutual love of Todd Rundgren and Utopia, I'm sure there's going to be a crossover here in at least one of them.
I don't know. There might be a crossover in band, but maybe not album. But we'll see.
All right, we'll see. So here, I'll get going with the first one, and just so you can get a feel of what I'm thinking of. Like I said, the depth and what we each want to share. Like I said, these are personal stories to each of us. So my first one, and well. Let me, before we start, tell me, in your opinion, why the Beatles were so influential. Let's start there, since we're going on to why the Beatles were so influential.
Well, one of the things you have to consider is timing, because at the time the Beatles came out, where media was in general, the Ed Sullivan Show was so important in terms of the U.S. experience. I mean, imagine if you grew up in the U.K., you probably had a very different experience with regard to the rise of the Beatles. But as far as the United States and sort of the worldwide phenomena, that was largely because of their exposure, the early exposure on television in the Ed Sullivan theater there. And, it was at a time when there wasn't a lot of TV stations. That's why everybody, I think people say, there'll never be another Beatles. The reason there'll never be another Beatles is because there's never going to be a television program that's going to capture that many people. Even the Super Bowl, there's still so many alternatives to watch while that's on. Or, I grew up, we all watched the evening news, we all watched the Tonight Show. And when I say we all, there were some people that didn't, but for the most part, A, you didn't have a lot to choose from, and B, those shows were they were good products and they captured a lot of people.
So they truly brought families together. There were those few instances where it brought the entire family around something.
Yeah, so they had the ability to get large exposure for their product. I think the other thing was that they were the first band that was really relatable to young people. They didn't seem larger than life. With Elvis, I mean, he was a guy that he was really good looking. He was just kind of he kind of had this natural swagger about him, all that stuff. You didn't look at a guy like Elvis and think, oh, I could be Elvis. Whereas with the Beatles, I mean, here are these 4 working class guys. Granted, they were dressed up in suits and everything, but they were just 4 dudes that had basically gotten together in the equivalent of a garage and started playing music together. And it just inspired so many bands to try to do the same thing. They said, well, if these guys can do it, maybe we can do it. And record companies responded in kind. I mean, they said, oh, well, this model works, so let's look for other bands, groups of people that are organic. We think even today from the corporate standpoint, you have like, the Backstreet Boys that are manufactured groups, the Monkees, which later were a manufactured group. But this was a group that came together organically with 4 lads. And again, the sum was just greater than the parts. I mean, there was there was an innate talent in that group that was just in a dynamic that was just incredible.
That's a
So
great point. So yeah, interesting. Okay, so let's dig in. And okay, so my first one, when I think about where I was, and I discovered both this band and this album at about the same time, shortly after, I would say, that the Beatles came into my life. My grandmother, I don't know what she was thinking when she bought me a Beatles album, and then later bought me this album. But I guess she wanted to be a hip grandma then, back in the early '70s. And so the album had been out a couple of years, and I just remember something about, from the opening notes of the first song, feeling that Beatles thing in it. And, as I'm sure as we'll get into this, we're going to talk about a lot of bands that tried to mimic the Beatles, wanted to mimic the Beatles, maybe subconsciously were mimicking if they weren't trying, But then there were also, everybody seemed back at the time to be in competition with the Beatles, because they were like, if they can do it, we can do it.
right.
And a lot of that stemmed, from the attitude sometimes of the players, and and in the Kinks with Ray Davies, there was a definite kind of attitude about, in some instances, we almost came before them, because they all kind of broke, like you said, over there about the same time. It's a different story over there than over here. But for me, when I think about myself, this album came out in the late '60s, and when I think about myself as a youngster in the early '70s, and this being one of the first albums I was given, and so from the first notes of hearing the Village Green Preservation Society, I had that same, whatever that same something is that goes back into, into the core of your soul. And again, this is as an 11 or 12-year-old, but I had it. And then as you go through that album and all those great songs, Picture Book and Johnny Thunder, and it's like one after another. And one of the things that was unique about both the Beatles and many of these, whatever you want to call them, competing groups of the time, was that some of these albums, every friggin' song was a great, great album, and a great, great song, and potential top 40 hit, even if they didn't make it. And I think the other thing, like going to what you said about Ed Sullivan, is because of the way radio was set up back then, and the music press, and the way albums all came out on Tuesdays, and we all sort of like, we all glommed onto these things when they came out at the same time. So there was a community aspect of it, amongst friends and whatnot, and even colleagues amongst younger adults, older young adults, that brought them together on things like this. But I just think this is, I've got a couple of mine that, again, for me personally, are these gems that just evoke that Beatles essence to me. So what do you have to say about the Kinks?
No, love the Kinks. That was, in fact, that was one I was going to pull out. I was just, I actually do a radio show here in the Rochester area called Turntable Tuesday with Tom, and I featured one from the road. So
One of the great live albums.
Yeah, just an incredible. I love double live albums, and that one, they really took their early sound and modernized it for the time. It was very punk, but then they recorded some of the songs nearby in Syracuse, New York, which is a couple cities over. But yeah, I have a huge Kinks collection, and I mean the big ones out of England. I was just going through some other stuff, pulling stuff for the show here, and looked at Led Zeppelin, and you got the Kinks, you got the Who, you got the Rolling Stones. I mean, yeah, the Kinks. The Kinks. Unfortunately, there was a long shadow cast by the Beatles and the Stones and even the Who, that I think the Kinks never get the recognition that they deserve in terms of one of the great bands that came out of England during the British invasion. But they're that we could do a whole podcast on the banning in America that they had, and
Yep.
all that other stuff. But
Well,
yeah,
being difficult to work with counted for something, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and they were amongst the most difficult to work with, as the rumors and the tales have it. So,
yeah, I interviewed Dave
I
twice.
did as well. That was an interesting interview.
He's a very interesting guy. Very difficult. I mean, his accent's so thick. I don't know what your experience was. It was very. It was a bit of a challenge, but just a lovely guy. I read both her books, actually, Dave and Ray's books. Ray's autobiography is much better than Dave's. Dave's gets a little too graphic when it comes to some stuff, sexual stuff, but they're both very interesting narratives. And Ray to me is just the consummate storyteller, you know.
And that's what I love about that is that's album is, story after story, the way that John and Paul and the song that George was allowed to put on every album, were being told. And even though it's mostly Ray singing most of those songs, it still evoked that feeling for me of all these different lanes that they're trying to fit this one collection of 10 songs into on this album.
Yeah, it was fun. I was just reading something about Sergeant Pepper the other day. Somebody was talking to Paul about it, and he said, we had this concept to Sergeant Pepper. He said we got about 2 songs in, and we were just like, we'll just record songs. They couldn't stay focused enough to make it a true concept album. But that's how it started. But yeah, the Kinks. I mean, that's the other piece. I mean, they were just great at concept albums. I mean, the Who gets all the credit for that, and even Pink Floyd to some degree, but. Man, the Kinks put out some really good. Schoolboys in Disgrace is one of my favorite covers as well, and I love the record.
Oh, then that cover. The cover art. Yeah. Oh my God!
As a teacher, that one hits home.
All right, give us your first one.
No, here we go. I got it right. I have it right here. I
know nice.
Go with this one first, but I'm gonna.
Go for it.
Do you know this one?
Yeah, sure. Good choice. Strong choice.
Yeah, just one of my favorite bands ever. But this record itself, to me, is just perfection. It's just there's not a bad millisecond on it. And I'm a huge Paul Carrack fan. Paul's on a couple of Squeeze albums. He was on this one, and had the hit with Tempted. You got Elvis Costello on there. I mean, Elvis Costello's got a lot of Beatles influences as well. But the songwriting team of Difford and Tilbrook, I mean, they were touted as the next Lennon and McCartney. And I think that's a fair comparison. I mean, they're very strong songwriters. It's just their music was the music came at a time where it wasn't quite as ubiquitous or as popular as the Beatles. But in terms of quality and the songwritings and the catchiness and the ear candy and yeah, I mean, that record, it explores so many different styles. They've got, the country song, which, you think about the Beatles, they do things like Rocky Raccoon and, but then they have stuff that's just pure, power pop, and that's very early Beatles influence. So a lot of Beatles influence permeates through that record, which makes it just a great record all the way around.
I think Paul Carrack is one of the most highly underrated performers, at least on this side of the pond, because that he's like the Michael McDonald of over there, I guess, is what you could if you could think of somebody to compare him to.
I wish
although I'd much rather see he's so good. Yeah. Even at present, I watch videos of him now live, and his voice sounds beautiful at the moment. And just like I said, when you think of the bands that he was in Ace, and then he's in Squeeze, and then he's in Mike and the Mechanics. I mean, this is a powerhouse.
Great stuff. He was in Roger Waters' solo band during the Radio Chaos tour. So there's some recordings.
A great tour with What God Wants on it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's got a whole bunch of. It's got Carrack singing "Have a Cigar," and some of the another brick in the wall. And,
wow,
I don't know. He just has a great voice. I think Genesis missed an opportunity when Phil Collins left. They could have brought in Paul to handle the lead vocal duties, but I don't know. Ray Wilson's a great vocalist too. We got on a little bit of a bunny trail, but I do love that last Genesis record. But yeah, Paul Carrack. In fact, there's a box set. Speaking of Mike and the Mechanics, of the Living Years, which is a great record, and there's a book in it, and it talks about how Paul Carrack and the other lead singer in Mike and the Mechanics at the time, a guy named Paul Young, different from the one who sings the "Every Time You Go Away," and him got into a fist fight. And I just read the thing, and I was like, man, I can't picture Paul Carrack in a fist fight with somebody, but I guess he showed up and Paul Young was intoxicated or something, or not ready for the show. And Carrack, punched him out and then handled lead vocals for everything that night. But it kind of speaks to what a professional Paul Carrick was in terms of, he showed up. He's ready to go.
I remember Todd saying that was part of his thing with leaving the Nas and some of the other early projects was these guys all wanted to party and he wanted to be a professional musician.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, so sometime, and Squeeze is still out there touring too, by the way. Like I see those two guys out there with whoever's backing them up, running around. They're on Chris Evans' morning show over there a lot, and so, again, still sounding really solid after all these years.
Yeah.
Okay, my next one, the same thing. And sometimes I think it's a blessing or it's a curse that you're going to be the next Beatles, right? And these guys were supposed to literally be the next Beatles. They were signed to Apple. Their one of the songs was produced by Paul McCartney or written by Paul McCartney. I think George Harrison was going to produce, and then, if I'm not mistaken, Todd Rundgren had to be brought in to clean it up, right? And that is Badfinger. And let's see.
I think we got our first crossover.
Oh, there's our crossover. Okay, let's go. Let's go. Tell me what you got on it. Go for it. There you go. That is our first crossover.
No, I'll let you go first.
Bada bing. Well, I think it's near perfection, Badfinger. Those in fact, those two albums, the two of the second and third album are near perfection. What I love about them is there's this organized chaos in these albums because I think of, like I say, the pressure of you guys are going to be the next Beatles, combined with they are out there doing their thing, and again, from what I've read about them, they too did not all get along famously. So there's it's just like pressure upon pressure upon pressure build, and yet they're spitting out, like I said, a couple of gems from start to finish. And people who may not know this band Badfinger and are fans of Breaking Bad, I mean, it was a Badfinger song that finished the series at the end of Breaking Bad for Walter White to die to the song Baby Blues, so which is on one of the other albums. But this is a great album. So tell me this is great. And by the way, Tom and I did not talk about any of this ahead of time.
No, that wasn't what I thought we were going to have a crossover on, but it's, I don't know, Badfinger. I got to meet Joey Molland briefly after a show. He was touring with Todd, and I think it was a White Album show. I don't know, just a really pleasant guy. But I mean, it's such a cautionary tale in terms of a band all the way around, because they got really screwed over by management. There's so many tragedies associated with the band, so many that I almost wish I didn't know them, because it's hard to imagine. I think like you listen to a band like Led Zeppelin, and there's a certain edge to it. There's a certain chaos that you can almost, when you hear that, there's this debauchery, there's all this stuff, it kind of makes sense. Whereas when you listen to Badfinger, it's such good, clear ear candy that you almost can't put the story with the music, because the music is so good and so pleasing. You can't imagine anything being bad that's associated with it. And there's a lot, but in terms of just the music, and I've got a lot of Badfinger, not just the Todd Straight Up There, which is the one I just showed you. Even the later records where the principals weren't there,
those were great too.
It's still great.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, they just but they had that Liverpool influence. I think Badfinger is more it's more early Beatles influence than later. They didn't get into the psychedelic stuff or a lot of the heavy rock stuff, but I mean, they were power pop pioneers. I mean, bands like Cheap Trick really wouldn't exist without bands like Badfinger. The Raspberries is another one I kind of throw into that.
Love the Raspberries.
That category. But yeah, it's one of those records. Again, I put it on, and every time I put it on, I go, man, I forgot how good this was. And even as I say that now, if I was to put this record on, I would listen to it. I would still say that. I go, man, I forgot how good this was.
And one of the things about that album and No Dice too is that it holds up. Like some albums you put on and you go, that sounds so 70s or so 80s, but this just sounds like good, like you say, good, straightforward power pop, whether it's today or 50 years ago.
Yeah, and part of that's, that was one of the things about Todd's production that I hadn't really contemplated until I read the Paul Myers book, where he talks about how, Todd was not a producer of his time. And so, I'm a big Tubes fan as well. Those David Foster records are are great records by the Tubes, and then you have Todd Tubes produced records, and you can tell the difference between the production styles because there is a, I mean, Foster stuff does sound very 80s. It sounds a bit dated. Um, whereas Todd is just producing songs. You know, he's not worried about the newest production technique. He's not, you know, doing this, that, and the other thing. He's not making the big drum sound, or if that's popular, or heavy bass, or the vocals buried in the mix, you know, all that stuff. It's like with movies. I don't know if you remember that there was a phase there for a little while where all the movies were so dark you could barely see what
Yeah,
was
yeah,
going
yeah.
on. And I'm just like I'm too old for this nonsense. But but yeah, it again, they just, the Badfinger, they just never, they didn't overdo it. I mean, their songs were just,
That's
it
a
was
great
just the
point.
right amount of production. It you know, they sounded polished, but they didn't sound overproduced. Like they didn't just add sounds for the sake of adding sounds. It was just, it was something that you could picture as a band just kind of getting together and playing, you know.
And I have uh, both remasters, multiple remasters of a couple of these albums and the earlier versions. And the remasters are great, but they're not that much better, which just, again, is a
Yeah.
testament to how beautifully clean they were produced back then.
Yeah. Yeah. It was just, you know, you start with a good song.
Yep.
That's what it comes down to. If you got a good enough song, you know, you don't have to be tricky with it.
That's the stuff. Speaking of which, you said David Foster. He was in that band in the '60s, late '60s, early '70s that had maybe that song "Wildflower" that had maybe the most dated. That's the most dated single of all time, I think. Speaking of dated, even though I still
Yeah.
love it to
Yeah.
this day.
Well, it's crazy. I was just doing, you know, I mentioned my radio show, so I was doing a tribute to Bob Weir, and one of the Bob Weir solo albums. I was looking through the credits for it. Haven't Helped the Fool, which is a great album,
Great,
by the
yeah.
way. But David Foster is on it, as are the guys from, you know, that went on to be in Toto. And it's just, it's so weird to think about, like, but they're all that San Francisco scene, you know. But yeah, David Foster and the Grateful Dead, it just seems very non-compatible. But yeah,
Music breeds kinship. So, okay, give
for
us one
sure.
of yours. We had a nice little crossover there.
A nice little crossover. This one, I'm I got a long story, more about the band than I do this particular record.
Go for it.
This one actually is sealed. So if anybody's a real collector, boy, make me an offer. Remember these guys?
Yeah. Very nice choice.
Yeah, so Klaatu. So when I was born in 1966, and the only reason I mentioned that is just for context. But out here in the Buffalo Rochester area, we had a store called Neisner's, and that's where we used to get our records. So you know, you'd walk into the store. It was almost like a Walmart or something like that. So you go in and they had this big display with all these Klaatu records, and then there's a sign over the top: "Is Klaatu the Beatles?" And there was a very short period of time where Klaatu's claim to fame was people thought that Klaatu was the Beatles under another name. And I think, you know, I've read some very interesting articles. I think there was one in Goldmine that was really excellent that kind of talked about the phenomena, how that both hurt and helped them. I mean, it helped the album sales while they were, you know, doing it. It was the equivalent of, like, you know, Paul McCartney is dead or any of those kind of things. So they wrote it for a while, and then eventually, you know, it kind of died off. And then somebody's like, "Oh no, Klaatu is not the Beatles," and it was like, I don't know. I remember listening to it on the radio too, where they would play, you know, Beatles songs followed by Klaatu songs. And I didn't think it was that close. I mean, there's clearly a Beatles influence, but I don't
I
know.
agree.
I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure how they were able to kind of, you know, push that narrative as long as they did. But I guess if you're trying to sell records, you're going to come up with just about anything. But yeah, sort of an unheralded band. A lot of, it said there is definitely a heavy Beatles influence, but
Heavy Beatles influence.
just did some good stuff.
Great choice. Wow, very nice. All right, let me see what I got here up next. Okay, so my next one is one of the blockbusters of the mid '70s, and I think 1, 2, 3, 4, I think almost every song on this record was a top 40 hit. including one
Wow.
that Todd still does to this day in concert. And that is, what's the name of the album? I forget the name of the album. New World's Record by Electric Light Orchestra, and which includes the song "Do Ya," which, like I said, Todd still does to this day, and I think in some ways does it even as well, or if not better. But to me, Jeff Lynne is like one of the prototype. He might as well have been a Beatle, for crying out loud, because every album and every song, there's just nothing but some sort of signature Beatles something in just about everything he does. And whether you're talking about Telephone Line or So Fine and Living Three, and one of the ones that had the it was Telephone Line that had the phone ringing at the beginning. Like, these are all things like that the Beatles and the Stones and the Who and these guys were doing 10 years earlier, that then Pink Floyd and, like you said, everybody picked up on. But like I said, I think Jeff Lynne is maybe the prototype. He could have been the fifth Beatle practically, along with Billy Preston.
Oh yeah, for sure. I just I picked up some records at an auction for an estate sale not too long ago, and the guy it was weird. I was basically chasing one or two records, and so I wound up getting a crate with all these other records. I didn't really know what was in them, but it was near the letter M. So I got a whole bunch of Move records, and there was like, I don't know, 5, 6, or 7 of them. So
Great band.
one of them had the original version of "Do Ya" on it, and Jeff Lynne, I don't believe, was on the first, maybe the first 2 albums with the Move or whatever, but you could sort of see that beginning and that evolution and the move towards ELO. And yeah, I mean, I don't know, ELO, what a great band. Just what it worked. And I guess it's just Jeff Lynne now. It's been Jeff Lynne for quite a while. I know they know
some of the latter albums were great. Like a couple of the last 3 or 4 albums, like 2 or 3 albums ago, there was one, I can't remember the name of it now. And that was a great album, and I fell in love with them again.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, even some of the live recordings, and they were one of those bands like Alan Parsons Project that there were some real limitations in terms of reproducing the sound live.
Yep.
So, with modern technology, when the last couple of times ELO went out, they were able to present the material at a very, very, high level. And what's crazy to me is, I think it was, early 2000s. They were going to go out on tour with Jeff Lynne. There's like an ELO 2, which has, Glenn Burtnick from from Styx there, and he and Chasm Sultan, I think, has maybe even played with those guys every now and then, just doing ELO tunes with some former ELO members. But they had to cancel the tour because they couldn't sell enough tickets in the U.S. And wow. I'm just like, man, if they had gone out, 10 years later, they could have played stadiums. But it's weird. The music industry is so weird how like bands' popularity ebbs and flows. But I don't know. They're a band I really wish that I had the opportunity to see live. I really enjoy their records.
And like I say, I think there's so much Beatle influence in everything he did. He wrote most of those Wilburys songs, and the same thing. It's like, there's like these George Harrison, folky sounds that I hear in those albums, and it just makes you melt. So yeah, he's a star, and hopefully he says that this last tour was the last one, but we'll see. You never know. So.
Yeah. Well, you said the W word, and it was funny as you were mentioning ELO. This was one I had pulled.
Nice.
And I didn't know if this was cheating because there's actually a Beatle on it.
There is no cheating. It's not the Beatles, so there is no cheating, and it would have Beatles influence. So okay, so go for it. Why since you pulled it up? Go for it.
It's so influenced. There's an actual Beatle on it. Yeah. But this is a great record, and man, the song "Handle with Care" alone is worth the cost at this point. And anytime Absolutely. You get this big of a group of names, boy, it could be a hot mess. But they did a nice job. Late Roy Orbison, I think this was probably the last major recorded project he had. But yeah, I mean, and it's Jeff Lynne. Is that when "Free as a Bird" and all that other stuff came out? I mean, he was the guy that they tapped to produce because he really did have a good understanding of what that kind of, I would say, Sgt. Pepper Magical Mystery Tour era Beatles sound. That's sort of his wheelhouse right there.
And think about the 5 diverse voices coming together, and yet it sounded beautifully. It blended together. It's like Crosby, Stills, and Nash and Young. It blended together beautifully.
Yeah.
Just a gem. All right. So my next one, you even mentioned earlier. So the Beatles were the first band, the first pop band, from what I understand, as I recall, to perform at the Budokan in Japan. And so again, when we talk about everybody chasing the Beatles and trying to be the Beatles, well, there's no doubt that Cheap Trick was in a lot of ways trying to be the Beatles. And how far did they go? They went and did a live album at Budokan, probably in memorial to their heroes there. So, and one of the great live albums. I know it gets a lot of knocks for being overly produced back in the studio, and some of the live integrity is taken out of it. But still, to me, it's an amazing project. It spoke volumes about who they are and where they came from and what the influence was, and the songs are great all throughout, and I want you, and I just think about Fast Times at Ridgemont High, my teacher friend there. I want you to want me. Remember what's his name in Fast Times? So,
Damone.
Damone, right? So, just a brilliant live record, and it is one of the 500 greatest albums of all time in Rolling Stone magazine. So.
Yeah, funny. No, I mean that was in the news recently because was it the producer? Who the heck was it? It must have been the producer that said that they didn't actually record the majority of it at the Budokan. They recorded in Japan at some other venue around the same time. So it technically shouldn't have been at Budokan. And then, Bunny Carlos comes out with like, this guy's full of it. I think it was Tom Werman maybe that came out with that. But man, Bunny Carlos, one of my favorite interviews of all time, and I was lucky enough to catch him after he was with Cheap Trick, so he was super candid. And the video, the audio's still out there. I did it for Rundgren Radio, but I had to edit a good chunk of it because it wasn't for public consumption. So if Bun passes away before I do, I'll put some of that stuff back in. That was pretty funny. But when they were talking about that, like, this guy said that part of it wasn't recorded it really wasn't recorded at Budokan, and there was a lot of studio stuff. And Bunny Carlos is like, nah, he's full of it. That's not what happened. I tend to believe Bunny Carlos because he's very much a steward of the old Cheap Trick catalog in terms of the tapes and the history and all that kind of stuff. And I had him on the phone for like an hour. He really knew the history well. But the more important part is that I got to see Cheap Trick around that time, and there's plenty of other recordings that are not doctored from that era, and they sound pretty much the same. I mean, it'd be one thing if at Budokan stood out, from the other live recordings of that era, but that's how the band sounded. I mean, they were just a great live band. And if they had to maybe deal with a couple of background vocals or maybe an out-of-tune guitar or a mic that wasn't properly, near the drum the wrong way or whatever, whatever, more power to you. And I don't care if it was recorded in Saskatchewan. I mean, it's just
it's a great record. Great record. And I have a Rock Love interview from the magazine days with Bunny Carlos also that I'll probably run at some point. And he was fiercely protective of them and their legacy, and that's 30 years ago. Oh, yeah. So interesting. Okay, what's the next one on your list?
The Todd Connect, them playing with Stookie and the Nas, and
right.
Some of those early recordings. Yep. So very cool.
All right, what you got?
That all goes back to Todd. Oh, let's see. We got which ones do I want to do? I'll do this one. What the heck? Because these guys are actually, I think they're out on.
I see just to see the color, and I know exactly what that is. Go for it.
Yeah, you remember these guys?
Oh yeah.
Split Ends. I got you. Yeah, just Split Ends and Squeeze. I kind of put them into the same category because I discovered them around the same time. And back when punk was the Clash and some of those bands and New York Dolls and things like that. I think there was this other, there was this other side of the spectrum, the Squeeze and the Split Ends, and even like Thomas Dolby, a lot of stuff that I was listening to around that time. But I really like the split. And if I'd had the Crowded House album, I mean, I might, and I just can't find it. Although I try to alphabetize most of my collection, I'd probably use that as well because it's, Crowded House has that really strong Beatles influence, but certainly before Crowded House, there was Split Enz. So I really like that record. I think it has some weak moments on it. It's not one of those perfect records like Squeeze's East Side Story, but when it shines very brightly.
Yeah, you say that, but the times that I've listened to it, I never fast forward to past anything. It just makes you listen all the way through. So, maybe not perfect moments or whatnot, but that is a solid album.
Oh yeah, it's a solid record, absolutely. But as I said, it's not. I don't know. There's just some record like that Badfinger record. To get back to that, there's just something really special about that. Same with the East Side Story record.
Especially when you hear you're like, oh, Beatles influence there, especially if you're a Beatles nut like we are. So, okay, well, we are celebrating with this whole podcast series, this magazine that was named after a Todd Rundgren song, and throughout the whole years of the magazine, we celebrated Todd and Utopia. And so in 1984, I don't know what they were thinking, but tell me, you know more about music than I do, but from what I understand, they basically took these Beatles riffs and tweaked them around a little bit and put out this album that sounds like a bunch of Beatles songs called Outstanding in Their Field, Deface the Music. And I love the picture of them in the field, and it said Outstanding in Their Field.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I have a cornfield right behind my house. I mean, there's no corn right now because we're in Buffalo and it's January. We're getting a huge snowstorm actually as we're recording this. But every now and then I'll just stand out in the cornfield and I'll be like, look at me, I'm outstanding in my field. So that's a great little pun.
Yep. And an interesting record. It was a true departure for Utopia. As I recall, the label had issues with putting it out at the beginning because it tracks so closely to some of the Beatles riffs. But it was an interesting experiment. And if you think about Todd being a forward-looking artist, what does everybody do today? They take and sample these things from these other riffs and do stuff on top of it. And so here's Utopia now almost 40 years ago doing just that. And so, in a way, that's like Todd doing his forward-thinking thing that he's always doing.
Yeah. Well, if you give me a second, I'm going to pull a record that's going to be related to this record.
For it.
It'll give you the whole.
All right.
It'll give us the whole story. I think it's within reach because I can actually see it.
Yeah, if you have to go out of reach, that's fine too. I can always add it.
Maybe it's serendipity that it was so close. So I don't know if you know the story.
Oh, right? Yeah, the story of Rhodey. Go for it. Tell us. This is a great story.
So the Beatles had recorded "I Just Want to Touch You" for the Rhodey soundtrack, and which includes Meatloaf in the movie. And Utopia actually appears in the movie. There's a scene where all the band members there and whatnot, and so it was these guys that rejected it because they thought that they would be sued because it sounded too close to the Beatles. And then I think Todd, just to be snarky, said, "Well, I'll just record a whole album like that." It's like an homage or whatever. I don't know what you call it. I'm not a fan of this record at all. I mean, I think I think it's so close that it seems like there's a couple of them where they just try too hard, where you get the Getting Better riff, which is, they change maybe one chord on it or whatever, but I don't know. I like the song Always Late. I think that's kind of a novelty song. I Just Want to Touch You. I've seen Chasm perform that.
Yeah.
But to me, it's, and I mentioned this, I think when we had our last show, is I started with Utopia and then became a Todd fan. So I just love that 4-piece lineup. And this album just completely derailed all the momentum they had.
I've heard lots of others say that. Yep. Yeah, well, because it's nothing like anything that was done before it. And like you say, maybe it was done for, the reason of Todd doing a snarky thing to get back at the labels and whoever in a movie studio and whatnot. But but I do enjoy this record. Not my favorite Utopia album, but I do enjoy it.
The other thing is the timing of it, because it came out right before Lennon was assassinated. So, And Todd will say this in interviews that, nobody really had a taste for like a Ruddles or any of that, or a Beatles parody, because, Lennon had just been murdered. And, Todd and John had a very interesting history as well. They'd kind of exchanged some words in the press and all that stuff. And I don't know. It's an album with a very interesting story. And I did ask Todd this one question about it, and was because when he produced Meatloaf Bat Out of Hell, he thought it was a Bruce Springsteen parody. Which, if you listen to it in that context, it makes sense. I mean, it's, Bruce has kind of got that big overblown thing, and then Todd even goes as far as to bring some of the E Street Band players on the record. But the songs were a little bit stronger, so people don't listen. They listen to it on its own merits and don't necessarily think of it as this big Bruce thing. And I said, well, was that what inspired you to do Deface? Because I thought there was a part of me that he may have thought he could catch the genie in a bottle again by doing a Beatles type parody, and like he did with the Meatloaf album. And he's like, no, that's not it. So I don't know. It's
well, remember, he also had that love of he had that Gilbert and Sullivan love too that he had back there from growing up. So there's some of that Broadway-ish about Meatloaf that may have been appealing to him. I mean, that's a remarkable story when you think about it, like that. He's the one who made that happen. So financially as well. So all right.
Oh yeah, the whole Meatloaf story is
who you got next?
Story in and of itself. How many we got left? I think I got a couple.
I've got two left. I've got two left.
Well, you mentioned Utopia, and I actually had this one
and another great Beatles sounding album,
because this to me is if it is what they should have done for Deface. It has a clear Beatles influence, but it's not close enough that it just sounds like they're rehashing their ideas. It sounds Beatlesque in the sense of just the great choruses, the great hooks. This is just to me a perfect power pop record. I mean, I love this record. Unfortunately,
great
it came
record.
out on a very bad label.
Yep.
And, they were kind of, they didn't get the support that they needed for the promotion. But even some of the live recordings from that era are just so good. To me, that was Utopia. Just when those last three records are just, they were really coming into their own, and unfortunately,
well, they fell to the whims of the industry, the labels, and to Todd's whims also, because he only can do each thing for so long. So.
Well, it's like what we deal with today with music. It's I'm a big Rick Emmett and Triumph fan, and Rick Emmett used to play out here all the time. I mean, I saw Rick Emmett play a free show in a parking lot to 200 people. And then now he's going out on a Triumph reunion show playing the same songs, but since he's with Triumph, he's playing 10,000 seat arenas. So a lot of it is in a name. And with Utopia, it was just the opposite. Todd was the name, and Utopia was the lesser of the two in terms of the commercial appeal. So
great story, and another great album. Great album. I mean, yeah, they just, I think Utopia is one of the most underrated bands of all time, man. So
I love them.
Okay, how about this one? Here is another band that literally tries to be the Beatles, I think still to this day in a lot of ways. But on this album in 1989, I believe, it's either 88 or 89, I was not into them at the time. During most of the 80s, I came to The Cure and Depeche Mode and this band and even Metallica, and so I came into all that stuff later. And I went back when I got over my snobbery or whatever it was at the time and rediscovered them, because throughout most of the 80s, because I wasn't into that at the time, I was just listening to my classic rock of the 60s and 70s. And one day at work, this friend of mine who was so into this band, and it's all he talked about, and he said, I want you to take my 2 tickets for this show tonight, and you and your wife go and see these guys, and don't tell me if you don't think they're one of the greatest live acts you've ever seen, which I came to think so and have seen them multiple times since. And so that was my introduction to Tears for Fears. I was not into them. I was not a big Tears for Fears fan. And they do this song on this album, which the whole album to me, quite frankly, sounds like a Beatles album. But this particular song, Sowing the Seeds of Love, they are literally in the middle of the song sampling something from I Am the Walrus, where you hear the do 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 do, and they're literally sampling that flugelhorn sound, and a great song and a great band. And to this day, I see them whenever I try and see them whenever they come around. They did a film just last year that went played in the movie theaters. That was a spectacular concert film and directed by a top director whose name escapes me now. A beautiful, beautiful piece of film. And I don't go to movie theaters that often anymore, but that got me out to go see in the movie theater. And so I just think that from start to finish was a special album. They found that gal that they introduced to the world, Oleta Adams, who was on that album and singing "Woman in Chains." And like I say, I think it's a great live band, and who put out, they've still only to this day have a handful of albums. I think they have under 10 albums still, but pretty much every one of those albums is a solid record. But I came to them late, like many.
Yeah, I almost pulled songs from Victor. I don't know what he did with it. I listened to it fairly recently, and I
couldn't decide between that and this, but I was so into this.
Yeah.
And then there's that song on near about the end of the world, and let's just two lovers, let's get in the bathtub and just enjoy our last minutes on Earth before the world blows up. I mean, there was just like so much beauty in it, all from start to finish.
Yeah, I think man, I mean that when you talked about seeing a band live and just totally changing your opinion on them, I had a very similar experience. I'd cover them. They were doing a show in Lockport, which is a show area not too far from Buffalo, and so I did in advance of the show. I interviewed Kurt, and we just really hit it off. He was just a fascinating guy, and he just really was doing a lot of stuff well beyond the Tears for Fears. And then after the show, he had said, "Hey, make sure you stop back and say hello. I'd like to meet you in person." And he was good on his word. There was a whole bunch of people waiting outside and everything, and he pulled me back, and I got a picture with the two of them. We got to chat and meet, and I've caught him a few times since. But yeah, I mean, I just loved him so much more after I saw him live. And from a commercial standpoint, to me, it's like, they were doing something very similar to like Split Ends and Squeeze, but man, they just managed to do it in a way that was just a little bit different, a little bit unique, and resonated with a much bigger crowd. And I don't know, just great stuff, and just enough of that Beatles influence to kind of put them over the top. But still, in terms of their creativity, I mean, lyrically, they're lyrically as strong as somebody like Pink Floyd, for sure. And but musically, just man, they just know how to do it. And when you listen to a record like any of their records, it doesn't sound like it would translate well in a live setting because it's so well produced. But boy, do they pull it off.
They're amazing.
And some.
And in their what, in their early to mid 60s now, they still sound magnificent together, and still making great music. This last album that they did was a beautiful piece of work. Roland Orzabal's wife, I think she passed away tragically of a mental health issue, and he talked, a couple of those songs on that last album talk about that, and you can, when you dig into it, it's really sad, but it's beautifully and poetically done. So.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, a lot of that mental health stuff kind of permeates through their entire catalog. But yeah, just a great band. And they've only put out a few albums together, but individually they've done a whole ton of stuff too. And Roland was doing it for a little while without Kurt. I think Roland's the more, he's the one people tend to think about because he looks unique too,
Yep.
But it really is the sum of the parts. It really is Kurt and Roland that make that band work. I don't know. I kind of got the impression that's a very Hall and Oates-ish relationship, that they work together well, but they're definitely not friends. But I seem to read that about a lot of bands these days that are all coming out. Townsend and Daltrey and all that other stuff. So a lot of these band guys are like, yeah, we don't really hang out outside the band.
Well, it's a tough relationship to be in for 30 or 40 or 50 years. I mean,
I would think so,
and it changes from what it was when you were 17. I mean, that's, and everybody grows up and changes, and it's, all the drama that's in any TV show or movie and enters the life of the band. So Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to get tough too when you're so tied to the hip of somebody else that it becomes problematic in the sense that look, Hall and Oates. I mean, a Daryl Hall record sounds a lot like a Hall and Oates record because Oates only sang a couple of songs. In fact, there's a recent Hall and Oates record, recent, relatively speaking, 20 years ago, and I was looking through the credits and like Oates wasn't on like 6 or 7 of the songs, you know, but. But yeah, those two together musically, hopefully they can keep it together as long as they're healthy enough to go out and perform. Because man, what a great duo! And I think they went out with Hall and Oates at some point as well on a double
Yeah, I
bill,
think
either
they
that
did.
or
Yeah.
20 or something like that. But
Yep. All right, I got one more. You got any more?
I got one more. This one, I mean, I'm surprised that you haven't come up with this one. I got a sealed copy of this one. Man, I remember these guys. They absolutely were the new Beatles and became as popular as them, didn't they?
Oh yeah, yep. They were the new Beatles, except without the depth of the Beatles, but they were the new Beatles.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. What a band. I mean, this record, I mean,
And what
I
a
don't know. I
push!
mean, you
What a
look
push behind that. Do you remember
look
the
at it.
marketing push? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's remember
Yeah.
that was
I mean, they're
everywhere.
just
That look.
yeah. I mean, this was a unashamed attempt at being the next Beatles. Good stuff. I mean, good songs. I mean, obviously My Sharona, I mean that song has definitely held up well, and Good Girls Don't. Just a lot of kind of fun stuff, but yeah, you're right. It definitely lacked the depth, and I think it was just I think they tried a little bit too hard to be the Beatles.
But
But
again,
man,
when did that come out? Like 79 or something, if I'm not mistaken.
let's see if I can see the. Yeah, my eyesight's not good enough to see what year this came out, but yeah, I'm assuming like 79.
So again, that's that period I'm talking about where there starts to become this hole, at least for me personally, where I started to drift from some of this new stuff that was coming out and went backwards to what I love, because a lot of this stuff I didn't connect with for that reason. Some of it seemed a little shallow. And these guys, this was pushed. I mean, I can't think of anything in that period, along with the Cars was another one that was pushed so hard on us, and the Knack is definitely one of them, and it worked.
Oh my gosh, just yeah, absolutely. And you figure you're 10 years removed from the Beatles breakup. And of course, with the death of John Lennon in December of 1980, I mean, then that just ended any possibility of the Beatles getting back together. Although I got to say, based on the modern musical landscape, I mean, if Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr decided to go out and build as the Beatles, they could. And I mean, you look at, I'm just amazed at how many bands can go out now with few or no original members. But I mean, that lineup of the Fab Four was so sacrosanct. Yeah, there was always this. There was always this chase. Even said if we go back through some of the ones that we discussed already, it's like the ones that clearly had a Beatles influence. I think of like Cheap Trick and Utopia. They weren't marketed as the next Beatles, but definitely like Squeeze. I mean, everybody was saying, "Oh, they are the next Lennon and McCartney." So they were the Lennon and McCartney songwriters. The Knack was the early Beatles. The Beatlemania Beatles. So they were absolutely pushed as the Beatles, and of course, Klaatu was pushed as the psychedelic Beatles, the band that was recording under a pseudonym because they were so incredible and creative. They didn't want to let anybody know that they were really the Beatles. It's all very fascinating.
But yeah, because no matter who we talk about and what within the circle, there's this anchor. These guys, like you said, after Elvis, these guys planted this anchor that it's like the way they talk about heroin and the way you chase that first one, the whole, for the rest of your life. People have been chasing now for 60 some odd years what these four guys from Liverpool did.
Oh yeah. Well, and again, it's the difference between you got to be born Elvis, you got to be born Frank Sinatra,
Yeah,
you
good
got to be
point.
born Taylor Swift, you got to be born Lady Gaga. You don't have to be born the Beatles. You just have to be for people. It doesn't even have to be men. I mean, there's been women that have gotten together in bands. The Go-Go's and Fanny. There's not as many Heart. But yeah, I mean that's where I think they just inspired people to do to do music as original music. And that's the other thing, original music. Elvis really didn't do original music. So the Beatles not only were a 4-piece band, they got to write their own stuff. It's almost more Buddy Holly influence than Elvis influence, because Buddy was playing and writing his own music. But yeah, it's all fascinating. And most artists that I interviewed that are from the post Beatles era, they all say the same thing. It's like, we saw that at Sullivan Show, and it inspired us to start a band.
How more influential can you be than that? All right, here's my last one. I am hoping I'm going to turn some people on to a band here. So this is from the Rock Love era. So this is from the mid to late 90s. And I'm doing the magazine. And, you get all the press shit from their publicists and everything constantly. And they're sending you CDs. And they sent me the CD, and I put it aside. And the publicist calls me and says, "Did you listen to that album yet? Because I want you to go see these guys. They're going to be opening for somebody at the Fillmore." Which in San Francisco was like the most fun place to go. It's Bill Graham's Fillmore. And I hadn't listened to it yet. And so I told her, I will. I promise I'll get to it. And so a couple of days later, I pick up and I start with the press sheet that they give you, the thing that the publicity people send you about the band. And it starts with something along the lines of, "He is the son of Haley Mills, who was the actress in The Parent Trap when she was a little girl. And now she's all grown up, and it's her son. And he's a young man by the name of Crispin Mills, and he started a band called Kula Shaker." And I encourage everybody, if you don't know them, to go check them out. And this is one of the bands that, in my opinion, could not be more Beatles influenced, because he literally took that George Harrison Gone to India period, and it's all throughout everything they do. The flugelhorns. He even comes out on stage in the Kafka robe with the slits up the side. The one-piece long male garment that they wear. I mean, amazing songs. They have a couple of big hits from that album, "Hey Dude" and "Govinda," and then they even did a great song showcasing other influence of theirs called "Grateful When You're Dead, Jerry Was There." And that's the name of that song. And it's a great tune. It's 303. Again, if you've not heard of this band, Kula Shaker, they are, one of the, they're somewhere in between Britpop and post-Britpop in that 90s to 2000s period, sort of when Britpop died, and bands like this and Long Pigs and a little bit after, like Manic Street Preachers and Stereophonics came out. But I think this is the first two gems. This one's called, the name of this album is called K by Kula Shaker. And the second album is called Peasants, Pigs, and Astronauts, which is also an outstanding record. And so, like I say, you just hear nothing but that when they just came back from India influence throughout multiple songs on every one of these albums. Every one of the songs on these albums.
Check it out.
So, yeah, check them out.
Sounds like fun.
Kula Shaker, great band.
Well, you mentioned the Grateful Dead. I mean, we just lost Bob Weir recently. As I was sitting there trying to think which Beatles songs the Grateful Dead covered.
Or how about your best? How about before we go, your best Grateful Dead experience? I know what mine is right off the bat.
Oh, man.
All right. While you think. Here's mine. Okay. And I saw them multiple times. Like, I used to live down the street from Shoreline Amphitheater in the Bay Area. So, you would walk down there. But on a parched hot July day, the largest show I've ever been to, my buddy and I went to see the Grateful Dead, and Los Lobos opened for them. And it was at Laguna Seca Racetrack. So the car racetrack in Northern California, it was 103,000 people. It was hot as shit. And, it's dry in the desert on this racetrack, and there's just 103,000 people kicking up dust. And, I'm sure I went home and it took me a week to clear out my lungs, but it was an unforgettable, after a beautiful Los Lobos set, then they come out and play for 3.5 hours. And it was just a great day.
Yeah, my first show was it was a place called the Rochester War Memorial, 9,000 people. And I remember the last song of the first set was this incredible version of Man Smart, Women Smarter. They opened up with Alabama Getaway. They did this really cool version of Stella Blue, and then they encored with it's either Johnny Be Good or Satisfaction. I think I don't know, but it was a Bobby song. But I don't know. I was not. I didn't know what to expect because at that point, in arena rock era, I mean, you go to a concert, you're looking for the effects, you're looking for the fog, you're looking for the fire and the explosions and the pyro and all that. So just to see a band that was just playing was just really like it was. I mean, it took me a little while, but I was like, I guess I kind of get it. When they first came out, I was like, what is this? It's just dudes standing around playing. And then I became as I continued to listen to them, it just became a really interesting and unique experience. So
Yep, just a special, special band. And when you think about, since we're talking about influences, when you think about all the songs in their catalog that they played that were their influences from all those years ago. In fact, when I was doing Rock Love, some label put out an album called the songs or their influences or something of the Grateful Dead, and it was the originals of all those old folky songs and all those old bucket songs that they did, and it was like there's Americana history right there. So they will be. You know what I'll miss.
The Beatles songs they did were, I know Tomorrow Never Knows, Dear Prudence. I'm trying to think what else. I think they did a version of Hey Jude at some point. I think there was a version of that kicking around. I don't know that they did a great job on the Beatles tunes. One thing I always respected about the Dead is they never tried to play a song like somebody else.
Right.
They always just
made it.
If they played a song, it was going to sound like the Grateful Dead.
Yep, as it should be. And the thing I'll miss the most to wrap up about now having lost Bobby and somehow they'll keep some of it going, but it's not going to be the same. But is along with Todd, they have this sense of community, those fans and those people in that group, even on a much bigger, obviously, level than Todd. And that was one of the things I always respected and admired. And it was as much about the community as anything. And what was going on in the parking lot before and after the shows was as much of the scene as what was going on in the show. And so, I just those were just special times. And that's something that's going to be hard to replicate also.
Oh yeah. Well, as you know, I'm in the Buffalo area and I'm a Buffalo Bills season ticket holder. And that's a lot of the appeal of my being a season ticket holder is that we have this whole parking lot experience. And there's actually there's a street in front of the stadium that we call Shakedown Street because it's just a bunch of vendors selling T-shirts and gloves and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that parking lot experience was very unique. I was just at a Billy String show recently, and they did kind of a scaled down version of it. But yeah, they'll never be. I mean, the music was what it was, but but again, kind of like a sports team. They had their wins, they had their losses. I mean, they had nights where they were great and nights where they were okay. But it was just cool to be able to feel like you were part of something and like you were just at a. And it's not even really a party. Like I said, it does.
It was
feel
a
more
community.
Like
it was some more
event.
than a party. It was more. A party's a party. Yeah. This was so much more than it was a gathering.
Right.
So,
Yeah, gathering. Burning Man.
So, but I'll never forget. I have a couple of quickies, and then I'll let you go. One time with my grandparents and their friends, and my grandmother's like, I don't know what the heck he was listening to in the car on the way here. Something about a train full of cocaine, and funny.
Gosh,
So, all righty, let me let you go. Hey, Tom, thank you so much for joining us. Tom Jennings is up in Buffalo. Tell everybody again where to find you and see your work. And before I let you go.
It's Tuning In with Tom, Thom Jennings. I've got Substack. I've got a YouTube channel. I have a radio show if you want to stream it on Tuesdays. It's called Rochester Free Radio, WRFZ. It doesn't, you can't replay it. So you got to catch it Tuesdays at 3:00, goes 3 to 5. I'll play full albums and ramble like, I like to ramble. So that's kind of a neat one. And, this upcoming Tuesday will be a couple of Bob Weir records. I don't know when this will broadcast, but it's always a full album, which is kind of fun.
Cool. Great to see you. Thank you so much for your time and joining us. We're going to go back in the studio and take a look at our Rock Love retrospective like we do every episode. Go check out Kula Shaker and let me know what you think. And speaking of Kula Shaker, the band that I would love for you to go and uncover and explore this episode, they were on the cover of our Class of 96 issue of RockLove Magazine when it came out in January of 1997, reviewing the best bands of the year that we both discovered, shows that we went to live and participated in. Was also an interview I did with son of the legend Frank Zappa, Dweezil Zappa. That is a very fascinating tape that I may have to digitize and play for you. I mean, Dweezil is great on his own and in concert and as a musician, but again, just being influenced by having Frank Zappa as your father, that was quite a conversation. And in 1996, no band ruled for Rock Love as did Sublime. And in this article of an interview I had with Bud Gaw, one of the surviving members of Sublime, we discussed tumbling from the top of the summit. Sad, sad, tragic tale of an outstanding band. And by the way, Sublime now, all these years later, is back out on the road, this time being fronted by Bradley Nowell's son, Jacob Nowell, who, as you can imagine, with the DNA matching, sounds eerily like his father. So go check them out when they come around. And then there was Elephant Ride. What brought me to the band Elephant Ride? Well, that was simple. Here's an album that when I was sent it by the promotions people, and I looked at the back of the album, I saw produced by John Paul Jones, the bassist of the greatest band in the land, Led Zeppelin. And so how could I not go and explore? And what I discovered was the band Elephant Ride. These brooding, moody, heart-wrenching songs where John Paul Jones pulled out of these guys this kind of emotion that was amazing. And we got to know Andrew and the guys in the band a little bit and did a lot of coverage of them. And that was featured in this issue of RockLove Magazine as well. And that will do it today for this episode of the RockLove Magazine Podcast, the podcast of the aptly named magazine from the Todd Rundgren and Utopia song Rock Love, where, as I said, we cover the magazine that ran from 1995 to 2001, looking at the people, places, and events of those times, recalling stories, looking at lists of our favorite albums and music and live shows and people of all time, and just recounting all of music history up to and including looking for some of the best new music that we can find today. So until I see you next time, I'm Scott. This is the RockLove Magazine Podcast. Have yourself a rockin' day.